Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at a problem that all road bikes have, and all pretty much bikes have in general, mountain bikes, any bike. It is one thing that is often overlooked, and this relates to brakes and brake lines. It also could be applied to the lines that go over to the derailleurs, the front and the back derailleur, but we'll discuss that in a few minutes. First of all, brakes, very important. Now, you set up your brakes. You bought a cheap bike, you set up your brakes properly, you go online, YouTube, and you say, man, these brakes are perfectly lined up, everything's great. And then you apply the lever, and then one of your pads goes in more than the other, and it stays that way. Then you go to the back, and you reapply your torque, you look at the nuts here to make sure, you center it. And no matter what you do, it always goes to one side. The next step you should be looking at is not your brakes. Your brakes are not the problem. And your tension is not the problem either. That's not the issue. The issue is short or long cable housings. That is your problem. In this case, right here, we can see that this housing is too short. It's not long enough. Now, I can take the cap here of the cable, bring the cable out, take the cable out of here, and bring this sleeve through the back of the other cable so that there's less tension on it, because these cables are pushing it forward. That was creating a problem where the pad was going to one side and the other one, and they would never come back to the other side. The reason why I want to discuss this is because people spend an hour, setting up the brakes, checking their spring, checking their torque on the back, moving it back and forward, and all you're doing is pretty much doing nothing. You're never going to get it solved. Always look, before you install your brakes, this is the critical piece. Before you install your brakes, make sure that your cable housings are long enough to reach the caliper. If they're too short, and if you feel that the caliper is being pushed up to one side, what ends up happening when you press the lever for the brake, well, one pad's going to be closer than the other. It's always going to be like that. Now, on these side pole ones, they're not dual pivot. That's not a really big problem, because once the one pad contacts the other one, will then meet it. But again, I hate that, and it looks very silly when you have your calipers hanging to one side. It looks very silly like that. So check the housing. That is your problem. The back brake is the reverse of that. On the front brake, we want a longer housing. Okay? On the back brake, we want a shorter housing, and I'm going to explain why. In the back brake, we have an angled caliper. Okay, they're not going up. This is not pushing up. It's pushing to the side. So you do not want a long cable line, a long housing. And this is why. Without this zip tie, this line here, this housing would be right here. And that's where it was before when I got the bike. It got stuck out to here, which meant it was putting pressure on the caliper to one side. So this section here was always going in and the other one out. Torque proper, everything set up, but the pressure was so immense that every time that you squeeze the brake, it would move it. So what I thought was, wait a second, I don't want to take too long. I don't want to take an hour to set this up. The brakes are already perfectly lined up. You know what I did? Zip tie it here, and no more problems. You can still control how much of the pads you want to come in contact with the wheel. Just move the bolt here. Just move the bolt. That's all you have to do. No issues there, okay? So it is up to you, okay, to check for these things before you finish up installing something. It's very critical that you check this, because if you don't, you're going to have problems all the time. You're going to be here for an hour or 2 hours trying to figure out if it's the spring, if it's the front nut, if it's this, if it's the pads. Listen, when you set up your brakes without the cable, right, without any of this, that's what you're supposed to do. So set up your cables without that, your brakes. Once you do that, when this comes in, this is your problem. It's not the brakes. It's the cable and the housing that's the issue. Okay? So please look at that. This is a critical problem on all bikes. I'm not talking about a $200 bike. I'm talking about even a $5,000, $6,000 bike. I've seen it all the way up to a $7,000 bike. So your mileage may vary. Your bike might not have this problem. But I seen this on a $7,000 Trek bike, where the front brake, the housing, was too short, and it was pulling pressure. Watch what I'm doing here. It was pulling pressure to one side. So what the person did at the bike shop is it was a dual pivot. they took the padding screw and the little bolt, and they tightened it so it went to the other side. The problem is every time that the person squeezed the brakes, it would go back again. It would be always odd. It wouldn't be set up properly. But that's because the housing was too short, and the person ignored that at the bike shop. So I was talking to the guy, and he said they still haven't solved the problem. And I told him, look at the front. Right? We went to his bike. We looked at the front of the bike, and I looked at it and I said, that's your problem right there. This here was too short. So what I did, so that we wouldn't have to reinstall a new line, is I told him, look, your bolt here goes all the way here. And we could see the bolt a little bit further down. So what I did is I told him, take that bolt, bring it all the way up and leave 25% missing off here. So bring it all the way here. And that was enough to bring this up and relieve the pressure on the caliper. That's all it took, and his bike was fixed. So now when you use the brakes, the front brake, the pads kept the same distance. So basically, always check your housings. After you finish setting up your brakes, always check those housings, the housing carriers, okay, for the cable. These are very, very important because if they're too short or too long, they can create problems. This has been a great tip. Again, please watch out for that because it doesn't matter if it's a $200 bike or a $10,000 bike for that matter. It doesn't matter. Any bike that has cables with cable housings, this will happen to. If they're too short or too long, they're going to create problems. So don't knock the brakes because they're cheap and you can't set them up. It's very easy to install these brakes. These are side pole brakes. They're the oldest ones there is. And they're very easy to set up, but you can't set them up properly with bad cable housings if they're too short, too long. It's not going to work. It's always going to pull to one side. Even though you set it up, you torqued everything, the spring is perfectly lined up, the pads are perfectly lined up, and then when you press the lever, they're not lined up anymore. So check for that. Thanks for watching, and enjoy riding.